I don't like to talk about myself. If you ever watch closely, if you're in a conversation with me, I don't like to talk about myself. But it isn't about myself. It's about the Lord Jesus. So I would share a little bit with you. It's hard to even begin to know what piece you might share, but I know that I was very blessed and realized that at the time, very blessed growing up. I have wonderful parents. They're still living. Mom's 91, Dad's 88, and they're doing pretty well. But wonderful salt of the earth people. To grow up in a home of Christian parents who they faithfully took me to church. They faithfully showed me an example of what it is to be a disciple. And so appreciative of that. I had the advantage of, when we were living in State College, we moved around a lot. There was a little church in the neighborhood, and my brother and I would go there for different evening programs and things, and there was the minister's wife there, taught us all the old Bible stories, the Old Testament story. You know, the felt figures that you put on the wall? Some of you may know. You move the felt figures around and you tell the story. And I got to know some of those Old Testament stories, which really became a part of who I am. I go back to them all the time. And I begin to, as I look back on this all, I begin to see that God has been at work in so many different ways. And there was a point where I said to myself that I thought that I wanted to be a minister, that I wanted to be a pastor. And the first time I remember talking about that was when I was 16 years old. We're at Philmont, New Mexico, which is a Boy Scout camp. And I was very much into Boy Scouts, and I shared that with somebody, and they thought that wasn't an entirely bad idea. This was a seminary student that I shared it with. So, we were living in New York State at that time, and as I prepared to graduate high school, where do I go to college? I heard about this Lycoming College in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. And this was a United Methodist Church-related school. As it turns out, the affiliation very loose. But I enrolled to come to college here. And kind of a naive person, I guess. But I came and I found that some of the teachers there, the religion teachers, were atheists. I kid you not. Actual atheists, opposed to God. But they wouldn't come out and tell you that. And, you know, you're supposed to figure it out. It was very, very confusing and difficult for me trying to learn from these people, and they were not believers. So I did become pretty confused, didn't know what to do, dropped out of college after a year and a half, and I was fortunate enough to get a job in construction because I had a lot of negative energy at that point. We talked about existentialism a lot in some of these courses that I took, and, you know, making sense of existence without what I had been taught growing up. Things didn't make a lot of sense, had a lot of negative energy, and I did get into the stuff that college students sometimes do. But I got a job in construction, very heavy work, 9 hours a day, all outside work, winter and summer. That was good for me. That was real good for me. And then at some point, after 2 years of that, I remembered WAC, Williamsport Area Community College, which is now, I was living in Gettysburg. My parents had moved to Gettysburg. That's where I was working when I dropped out of college. So I came back to Williamsport and I got into the community college, and I took construction, and I also took an extra year to get an associate degree in business, and I got a job selling homes, okay, for Lundy Homes. Some of you may know that name. And my boss there one day said, Rick, why don't you go to church with me this Sunday? And that was the thing that totally turned my life around, because I hadn't been in a church for quite a few years since I dropped out. And I was working for several years till that invitation came. And it was First United Methodist Church. Now I'm a pastor in United Methodist Church, First Church, which is pretty amazing. But an invitation changed my life, because right away God took hold of me, being there in the church and in God's people. And I'm just so thankful that God could use me in a way that was in my heart. And at an early time, and I look back and I see how some of the bad things, God could bring good from them, because now when I speak to someone who doesn't believe, I'm pretty solid in where I am, because I struggled all through that stuff, and faith truly became my own. I see how God used my construction experience. I was one of the people that helped to start the Williamsport Habitat for Humanity. When I was working at Lundy's, a group got together, and God used me. And in the construction, I was in the construction group of that for many, many years. But God worked. God didn't give up on me when I kind of gave up on God. And I'm just thankful as I go through life, and I am growing closer. I still worry a lot. I mean, if you would ask me, Rick, what's your big spiritual trouble right now? I'd say I worry. And I shouldn't worry, but I do worry. And the only remedy seems to be a lot of prayer and praying the scriptures, and maybe going back to some of those Old Testament stories where God delivered. But that's just a little bit of my story, how I eventually became a pastor. I did finish my bachelor's degree at Lycoming. It took me 17 years, taking one course at a time. But I did graduate, and I'm just very blessed to be a pastor in the United Methodist system now. Went the course of study, which you can be a pastor. It's like credit for real life experience. I went 5 years in the summers in Washington, D.C. to get that license. So I feel very blessed. I'm so glad that God didn't give up on me. I hope that God can use me a little bit more in different ways as he uses all of us. So there's a little piece. And can you tell I don't like to talk about myself?